Hey, what's going on, guys, and welcome back to Rivalries here on the WWE podcast on this July 23rd, 2020, as we are approaching the SummerSlam pay-per-view. And based on some of the returns that we had this week, some good, some bad, the good being John Cena, the bad being Goldberg, it is shaping up to be a very significant pay-per-view and probably one of the more significant pay-per-views we have seen since the beginning of the pandemic, all the way back in March of 2020. But obviously, we're not here to talk about the main product, or the current product rather. We're here to talk about old school rivalries. And this one that we're going to talk about today is not as old school as we typically like to go back on. Like 15 years ago when we covered Goldberg versus Triple H, or Batista versus Triple H, or Rock versus Brock. This one is one of the more recent rivalries in Dean Ambrose versus Seth Rollins that went on from 2014 all the way into early 2019, right up until Dean Ambrose ultimately left the company for AEW and became Jon Moxley. And this was a rivalry that I think in a lot of ways left a lot to be desired, in large part due to some injuries to Seth Rollins, injuries to Dean Ambrose as well, and then ultimately Dean Ambrose leaving the company in favor of AEW in the spring of 2019. And it's unfortunate because I believe that this was a program and a rivalry that was deserving of a main event in a WrestleMania type of capacity. I think that in a lot of ways, this was a rivalry that could have closed several pay-per-views involving the World Championship. And to its credit, it did. They had several matches for the WWE World Heavyweight Championship when Seth Rollins was holding that title in mid-2015. But in a lot of ways, both of these guys only hit their peaks in the later years, let's say 2016 and 2017. Although Seth Rollins won the World Championship for the first time at WrestleMania 31 in 2015, he has grown exponentially since that time, and ditto for Dean Ambrose. And this whole rivalry really got started in the summer of 2014. And this is when we saw the Evolution vs. Shield rivalry that I previewed a few months back on this very same show. And after back-to-back wins against Evolution at, I believe it was Payback and Extreme Rules, we got the Monday Night Raw that followed, in which Batista quit the company and walked out on Evolution. But Triple H was insistent that there was still a lot to be sorted out between himself, Randy Orton, and the Shield faction. And when he came to the ring, flanked by Randy Orton, he explained to the Shield that there was always a plan B.
What I do better than anybody is adapt. Last night was plan A. Tonight, plan B. There's always a plan B. Oh my God! What just happened? Are you kidding me? Rollins now! He's assaulting Ambrose! Rollins assaulting Ambrose after he took out Reigns! What is going on here? You guys are on top of the world. Why in the world would Seth Rollins do this? My God, Rollins is destroying Ambrose! Broke that chair over. Broke that chair over Ambrose.
So Rollins turning on the Shield was the first ever time we saw him turn heel and the dissolution of the Shield. And this was kind of like the unofficial kickoff to his rivalry with Dean Ambrose. Because shortly thereafter, Reigns and Ambrose broke up as well, and all three of them kind of got their own singles pushes. And when this happened, Roman Reigns kind of got thrusted into the main event scene right away, as I'm sure all of you guys remember that quite clearly, as WWE was adamant that he was going to be kind of like the star, for lack of better terms, to come out of the Shield faction. And he got thrust into a rivalry right away with Kane, who was the director of operations at the time, with Randy Orton as well. And Dean Ambrose, right out of the gate, kind of made it his goal to not let Seth Rollins cash in the Money in the Bank briefcase. Because that is what happened. Seth Rollins won the Money in the Bank briefcase shortly after his heel turn on the Shield and became kind of like the appointed chosen one of the Authority, the future of the business. And this is kind of where Dean Ambrose fell in for quite some time here, as kind of like the guy who was going to be the rebel and not let Seth Rollins cash in that Money in the Bank. So their initial rivalry was when neither of them had ever won a singles championship outside of the Shield. Obviously, Dean Ambrose had won the US title about a year before this, or actually, I think he had only dropped the belt about a month before the breakup of the Shield in a battle royal that Sheamus won the championship, actually. But this was their first ever time as solo competitors. And we know that Seth Rollins had J&J security. He was backed by the Authority. But again, it was the first time we had ever seen these two, and Roman Reigns for that matter, outside the Shield. So when their first rivalry kind of got kick-started here, it wasn't anything more than a grudge that Dean Ambrose was not going to let Seth Rollins cash in that Money in the Bank briefcase. And this initial installment of their rivalry culminated at the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view, when Bray Wyatt actually got involved in the Hell in a Cell and hit Dean Ambrose with his sister Abigail, allowed Seth Rollins to gain the victory, and kind of ended their rivalry for the time being. And Dean Ambrose ended up having a rivalry with Bray Wyatt that spilled all the way around the Royal Rumble time. And this is when Seth Rollins started to get pushed more and more into that main event picture. He had a triple threat match for the World Championship along with John Cena and Brock Lesnar at the Royal Rumble in 2015. And then it really started pushing towards his program with Randy Orton at WrestleMania 31. And he actually loses that match to Randy Orton at WrestleMania 31, his first ever one-on-one match at a WrestleMania. But later that night, we know the story, we know what happens. I've glossed over this moment several times in the shows that I've done here, that he cashes in Money in the Bank in the middle of the Brock and Roman Reigns match with the infamous heist of the century. And following his victory over those two via the Money in the Bank cash-in, we saw Seth Rollins first off have that piggyback rivalry with Randy Orton as they clashed at the Extreme Rules pay-per-view, or Payback, because WWE always switches up the order of the pay-per-view, so sometimes it's really hard to track. So that was the first title defense that he had. The following pay-per-view, he successfully defends it in a fatal four-way match against Randy Orton, Roman Reigns, and Dean Ambrose. And following this pay-per-view, where he successfully defends it in the fatal four-way, we see them kickstart again the Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins rivalry, as they clash at Elimination Chamber first off. And again, Elimination Chamber at this time was at the end of May. And now we've come to know it as kind of like the go-home pay-per-view before WrestleMania. So as you go over the years, on a little side note here, they really kind of mix and match where they put these pay-per-views in, as we saw this year with Hell in a Cell. You know, you always have the main 4 pay-per-views of Mania, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, Rumble, but all the other ones that are in between are kind of interchangeable in the minds of WWE. But that is neither here nor there. And Ambrose wins this first clash at Elimination Chamber via disqualification. And as we know, the championship can only change hands via pinfall or submission. So at the very next pay-per-view at Money in the Bank 2015, we get them in a ladder match for the championship. And this time around, as we all know, Rollins is unable to retain the championship via a disqualification. But lo and behold, the director of operations and J&J Security somehow find a way to get involved.
Buried under a pile of rubble of chairs and ladders, Seth Rollins approaches his ladder and his climb to the WWE World Title. Triple H said, show the world. The world's watching, and Seth Rollins has delivered. Rollins physically spent, but looking to savor the moment. Ambrose! Rising from the rubble again! I can't believe it! I can't believe it! Neither can Rollins. Rollins looking back. Life left in Ambrose. Rollins has got the championship, but Ambrose has got Rollins. What do you have to do to keep Dean Ambrose down? Wait. Ambrose has got it too. Ambrose has got the title. Ambrose has got the title. Get it. Hang on to it. Rollins has got it as well. Both men have the championship. Both men are on the ladder. Rollins has it. Rollins has it. What? Seth Rollins has the championship and has been declared the winner. Dean Ambrose headed to the impact of hitting the back. Knocked it out of his hands.
Here is your winner and still the WWE World Heavyweight Champion, Seth Rollins.
King's right, both men have the championship, but as they hit the mat, Rollins came away with the title.
So I actually made a mistake. J&J Security and Kane actually had nothing to do with with the finish of that match. It was just that both men had their hands on the belt, and as it became dislodged from the buckle hanging above the ring, and as they hit the mat, it broke away into the arms of Seth Rollins. So Seth Rollins, more or less, gets a clean victory over Dean Ambrose. And this was kind of like the end of their rivalry for about a year at this point, because this had been the third straight pay-per-view that Ambrose had a chance for the championship, second consecutive one in a one-on-one capacity. They go their own separate ways. Ambrose gets kind of involved in the Bray Wyatt-Roman Reigns feud, and it kind of becomes like a portion of the Shield versus the Wyatt family. And Rollins goes on to have a match against Brock Lesnar, then has a back-to-back pay-per-view matches against John Cena, and defends the championship against Sting, and ultimately gets injured and has to relinquish the championship ahead of Survivor Series in 2015. And Roman Reigns wins the championship against Dean Ambrose, ironically enough, and we don't see Rollins in the title picture for just about, I would say, 7 or 8 months. And it is ultimately when Roman Reigns retains the championship and it was against, the name is escaping me who Roman Reigns retained the championship against and at what pay-per-view. But Rollins essentially comes back and tells Roman Reigns that, that was a championship he never lost. And lo and behold, at Money in the Bank 2016, we get the one-on-one match between Seth Rollins versus Roman Reigns for the championship. And you may be asking, well, what does this have to do with Dean Ambrose versus Seth Rollins? And the other little tidbit about this is that at Money in the Bank 2016, it was Dean Ambrose who won the Money in the Bank briefcase. And by the end of the match of Roman Reigns versus Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose found a way to make himself involved.
He reclaims the championship he was forced to vacate back in November. He's powerless the knees 100%. It's... Oh my God! Ambrose won Money in the Bank earlier tonight! Ambrose won the Money in the Bank contract earlier tonight! Is he going to cash in? No way! Is Ambrose going to cash in? No way he's coming to cash in. It's not an opportune time. Seth Rollins is standing up. Oh my God, guys! Red Flawless! Ambrose with a briefcase! Please, no! Is he going to really? Dear God, no! Briefcase off Rollins! No! The champ is down! He's cashing in! Ambrose is cashing in!
Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Ambrose is cashing in his Money in the Bank contract.
We got a championship match! I can't believe it! We got a championship match! Rollins can't believe it! He's looking at a ghost! A ghost of his past! Rollins doesn't know where he is! Ambrose! Dirty Deeds! Ambrose the cover! Kick out, Seth! Ambrose is champion! Ambrose is champion!
Here is your winner and the new WWE World Heavyweight Champion, Dean Ambrose.
The ultimate payback! Dean Ambrose is WWE World Heavyweight Champion! This is a nightmare to end all nightmares! Is this really happening?
And Dean Ambrose becomes the final member of the Shield to win a World Heavyweight Championship. And a little side note on Dean Ambrose, and I kind of talked about this when I reviewed his rivalry against AJ Styles, which almost directly followed the summer of 2016, is that he kind of got the four-letter word end of the stick out of the members of the Shield, because you had Seth Rollins, who got pushed right out of the gate as the main event level heel, and Roman Reigns is the main event level babyface, and he kind of got thrown by the wayside. And you could make the case that he was the most beloved, Dean Ambrose that is, of all the Shield members. And when he won this championship, I thought it was going to be a start of very good things to come for Dean Ambrose. You know, they sent him over to SmackDown before they sent him to SmackDown, he retained the WWE Championship at Battleground 2016 in a triple threat match that involved all three members of the Shield. He retains that. He then becomes the first ever draft pick to Shane McMahon's era of SmackDown and brings the championship over with him. Rollins and Reigns stay over on Monday Night Raw. And when this happened, I truly thought that it was going to be a sign of things to come, that Ambrose was going to be the face of SmackDown as they went back into a brand split. And lo and behold, he was the face for the first 4 or 5 months, I would say. But after a month and a half of the brand split being back into effect, he drops the championship to AJ Styles, never gets it back for the duration of his run with the company. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say that AJ Styles was not deserving of being WWE champion over the last, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years. I think you can make the case that his run with the championship was one of the best, top 5 for sure. And aside from Roman Reigns' current run with the championship, you can make the argument that it was the best world championship run in the WWE in the modern era. But Ambrose not getting it back was a shame, because you heard in that clip that when he cashed in on Seth Rollins, it was just such a electric pop for him that it had finally come full circle for Dean Ambrose, and that he had finally was the last one to become the world champion. And because he went over to SmackDown for just about 8 or 9 months, this entire rivalry kind of lied dormant for almost the duration of that time. And he comes back over to the company, or to Monday Night Raw, in 2017. And it took a while for them to get this back on the tracks here with him and Seth Rollins. And it ultimately leads to him and Seth Rollins winning the Raw Tag Team Championships in the fall of 2017 as they bring back the Shield for a short-lived run. And, you know, they had the whole, like, that Dean wasn't going to trust Seth and all those shenanigans. And, you know, before it ever really got off the ground, Dean Ambrose suffers an injury in, I believe it was December 2017. And that kept him out all the way until the summer of 2018. So whatever they had planned to rekindle that rivalry post them winning the Raw Tag Team Championships together had to be put on the back burner. And Seth Rollins did a whole hell of a lot in the absence of Dean Ambrose, and he was really skyrocketing up the ranks of the Monday Night Raw landscape. And by the time the summer of 2018 rolled around, Seth Rollins was really having an incredible run with the Intercontinental Championship, really legitimizing that belt in a feud that didn't involve The Miz. And on a side note, The Miz just did a masterful job doing legitimizing that championship. And then he gets enticed in a rivalry with Dolph Ziggler for the Intercontinental Championship, and Dolph Ziggler at this time was flanked by Drew McIntyre. And it was right up until, I think it was about August, that Seth Rollins was completely outnumbered 2-1 by Drew and Dolph, until he brought back an old friend.
But I didn't want to come out here until Dolph had officially signed that contract, because Dolph, I was afraid you'd change your mind once you heard what I had to say. The truth is, I was dealing with some travel issues. They weren't exactly my travel issues. And you know that little clause in the contract about me having someone in my corner at SummerSlam? Well, that was put there for a very particular reason. You see, I've kind of gotten sick and tired of dealing with you guys 2-on-1, and since I know you're going to have the Scottish psychopath in your corner at SummerSlam, I ought to have a lunatic in mine.
Oh my! Look who's here! The lunatic French is back! Rollins and Ambrose going after Dolph and Drew McIntyre!
And you may be asking, well, what does that have to do with, you know, their rivalry? And it's because this directly led to them rekindling their rivalry, because it ultimately turned into the Shield versus Braun Strowman, Drew McIntyre, and Dolph Ziggler. And obviously we know that in the midst of this rivalry and in the midst of the Universal Championship run of Roman Reigns as a babyface, it was revealed that he had to step away from the company because of cancer. And that really just brought this entire program to a screeching halt. And by this point, Rollins was the Intercontinental Champion, and him and Ambrose were once again dual Raw Tag Team Champions. And it was on an episode of Raw on October 22nd that we finally got to see the official rekindling of the Ambrose-Rollins rivalry.
What the hell? Oh my God! What the hell? Are you kidding me? Not fuck you want? Huh? Why? Look at funny. Huh? Oh. Huh? Come on. Okay, man. Say it again, huh? Say it again. Say it. Come on, man. Say it again. Watch your mouth! Watch your mouth! Watch your damn mouth!
So Dean Ambrose turns heel and absolutely mutilates Seth Rollins, and it ultimately ends with the dirty deeds on the outside after he removed the padding right onto the concrete floor. And it kind of was an underwhelming end to their program because Dean Ambrose ends up winning the championship away from Seth Rollins, the Intercontinental Championship that is, at TLC. And it just kind of quietly went away. They didn't have good chemistry in the ring, and I think it was mainly because WWE was trying to usher Seth Rollins into the main event scene while they really had no plans for Dean Ambrose. And we later found out that Ambrose asked for his release, or not that he asked for his release, but more so that he just had no interest in staying with the company long term. And what was it, 6, 8, 9 months later, he was with AEW. So I think that obviously had a lot to play with it, or a lot to do with it, rather. And Seth Rollins went on to win the Royal Rumble in 2019, defeat Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 35 to become the Universal Champion for the first time in his career. And we just kind of never got a true payoff to Dean Ambrose versus Seth Rollins. And to be honest, I don't ever think we got a very good rivalry between any two members of the Shield to this day. And I think it's borderline criminal that we've never had a one-on-one match between Roman versus Seth, or Roman versus Dean, or Dean versus Seth at a WrestleMania. None of these two have ever clashed one-on-one at WrestleMania, which is absolutely astounding to think about, given the fact that they collectively formed one of the most successful factions in possibly of all time. You could make the case that it's a top 10 faction in the history of the company. And I will maintain that WrestleMania 36 should have been Dean Ambrose versus Roman Reigns, main eventing that for the WWE World Championship. I will die on that hill, as Seth Rollins was out with injury. And then WrestleMania 33, okay, you want to tell the story of Seth versus Triple H or whatever, but you could have done Seth versus Dean Ambrose. Dean Ambrose wasn't even on the main card. He defended the Intercontinental Championship against Baron Corbin in the pre-show. It was just it really is a damn shame what they did with Dean Ambrose. I know they never viewed him as a main eventer, probably like the other two, but just as a whole, it was kind of a very, very good rivalry that left a lot to be desired at the end due to some underlying circumstances behind the scenes that I think WWE was probably a lot to blame. Maybe Dean Ambrose wasn't fully invested in that character and that gimmick. Well, actually, not that I think he confirmed it on Jericho's podcast after leaving the company in 2019. But, a very good rivalry that kind of ended on a sour note that left a lot left to be wanted. But anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today. As always, you can get me on Twitter at ADamarco25. You can get Matt on Twitter at wrestling_audio, or you can email him at real WWE podcast at gmail.com. Man, tough for me to speak today, eh? But as always, guys, take it easy, and I'll talk to you next time.